The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and neither had the eviction notices. Daniel Reyes stood outside the glass tower of Cross Industries with his daughter's medicine receipt crumpled in his fist and $400 left in his bank account, staring up at a building that seemed to touch the clouds, when a black car pulled up beside him and a woman's voice said, "Get in, or you'll lose the only chance you'll ever have to save your daughter." He turned, rain sliding down his collar, and found himself looking into the sharp, unreadable eyes of Elena Cross, the woman whose face was on every business magazine in the city, the youngest CEO to ever run a Fortune 500 company, a woman rumored to have ice instead of blood in her veins. She was not supposed to know his name. She was not supposed to know he existed. And yet here she was, in the rain, holding the door of her car open for him like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "I don't know who you are," Daniel said, though of course he did. Everyone in the city knew who she was, "but I'm not getting into a stranger's car." "You're Daniel Reyes. 34 years old. Former structural engineer, laid off 8 months ago when Voss Construction folded. Single father to a 6-year-old girl named Mia, who has a congenital heart condition that requires a surgery you cannot afford. Your landlord filed for eviction 2 days ago. You have $412 in your checking account and no family to call." Elena's voice didn't waver, didn't soften. She recited his life like a woman reading a grocery list. "I know exactly who you are. That's why I'm here." Daniel felt something cold slide down his spine that had nothing to do with the rain. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I don't make jokes," she said. "I make offers. And you're about to lose the most important one of your life if you keep standing in the rain arguing with me." He should have walked away. Every instinct in him, the instinct that had kept him alive through his wife's death, through unemployment, through nights of measuring out Mia's medication in careful teaspoons because the pharmacy bill had eaten his last paycheck. Every instinct told him that women like Elena Cross did not appear out of nowhere to save men like him without wanting something enormous in return. But Mia's surgery was $280,000 he did not have, and his daughter's lips had turned faintly blue twice in the last month, and pride was a luxury he had buried the day her mother died. So he got in the car. The office Elena took him to was 40 floors up, all glass and steel and city lights blurred by rain, and she didn't offer him coffee or small talk. She sat across from him at a desk the size of his old apartment's kitchen and said, without preamble, "Marry me for 1 year." Daniel actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark of a sound. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. Marry me. 1 year. A legal marriage, public, convincing. In exchange, I will pay for your daughter's surgery in full, clear every debt you have, and place $2 million in a trust in her name that matures when she turns 18. At the end of the year, we divorce quietly, you keep everything, and you never have to see me again unless you want to." "Why," Daniel said slowly, "would a woman like you need to marry a broke single dad she picked up off the street?" Something flickered behind her eyes. The first crack he'd seen in that composed, glacial face. "My grandfather's will," she said. "He built this company from nothing, and he left it to me on one condition, that I be married before my 32nd birthday, and remain married for no less than 1 year, or controlling interest transfers to my cousin Julian, who will gut this company for parts and lay off 11,000 employees to line his own pockets. My birthday is in 6 weeks. I have no husband, no boyfriend, and no interest in marrying anyone I actually know, because everyone I know wants something from me they'd never admit to my face. And I don't." "You want your daughter to live," Elena said. "That's not the same thing as wanting me." Daniel sat back in the leather chair, rain still dripping from his hair onto his shoulders, and studied her, really studied her, past the magazine cover polish, past the reputation. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer hadn't fully hidden. Her hands, folded on the desk, were gripped just a fraction too tight. "Why me?" he asked again, quieter this time. "Out of everyone in this city, why a stranger?" "Because you have no agenda," she said. Because you're desperate enough to say yes and honest enough not to lie to me once you do. My assistant found your case in a database of families needing emergency medical crowdfunding. I read your daughter's file at midnight 3 weeks ago and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. You didn't ask anyone for a bailout. You sold your wedding ring, your car, your late wife's jewelry, and you still came up $200,000 short, and you kept applying for jobs anyway instead of begging. That's not weakness, Mr. Reyes. That's exactly the kind of person I can trust not to sell our arrangement to a tabloid the moment it gets difficult. He should have asked for time to think. He should have gone home and slept on it. Instead he thought of Mia's small chest rising and falling too fast some nights, of the doctor's voice saying the window for this surgery is closing, and he said, okay. Elena blinked, as if she hadn't expected it to be that simple. Okay? 1 year, Daniel said. But my daughter doesn't know this is fake. She's 6. She's already lost her mother. I won't have her lose another parent figure to a contract expiring. If we do this, you're kind to her, you're patient with her, and when it ends, we end it in a way that doesn't break her heart. Those are my terms. For a long moment Elena Cross, who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, said nothing at all. Then she nodded, once, like she was signing something invisible. Agreed. The wedding was small, fast, and utterly unconvincing to no one who mattered. Which was the point? Elena's publicist spun it as a whirlwind romance, the CEO who finally let her guard down, and the press ate it up because it was a good story. Cold, brilliant Elena Cross, thawed by a handsome, humble single father with sad eyes and a sick daughter. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody except Julian, Elena's cousin, who showed up at the small courthouse ceremony uninvited, stood at the back in a gray suit, and watched Daniel slide a plain gold band onto Elena's finger with an expression of pure, calculating suspicion. Convenient timing, Julian said afterward, cornering Daniel by the courthouse steps while Elena spoke to the officiant. A construction worker, marrying the richest woman in the state, 6 weeks before her deadline. You must be very much in love. I love my daughter, Daniel said evenly, and Elena has done more for her in 2 weeks than most people manage in a lifetime. I don't much care what you think about the timing. Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see how convincing this marriage looks in a year, Mr. Reyes. Contracts have a way of showing their seams. Daniel didn't tell Elena about that conversation. He didn't need to. She found out anyway, because she found out everything, and that night, in the enormous house she'd moved him and Mia into, a house with a real yard, with a room already painted soft yellow because she'd remembered, from some file somewhere, that yellow was Mia's favorite color, she found him on the back porch and said, Julian's going to investigate us. He'll hire people. They'll watch us, dig into our phones, our routines, everything. If this is going to work, we can't just look married on paper. We have to actually learn each other. Otherwise the first real conversation we have in public will give us away. So what do you suggest? Daniel asked. Marriage boot camp? The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Dinner. Every night. No phones. We talk like people who actually chose each other. That was how it started. Not with fireworks, but with small, ordinary dinners in a kitchen too big for 2 people who were still strangers. Elena, it turned out, could not cook to save her life. The first night, she nearly set off the smoke alarm trying to make pasta, and Daniel, who had learned to cook out of necessity after his wife died, standing over a stove with a crying toddler on his hip, took the pan from her hands, laughing for the first time in months, and said, Sit down, Ms. Cross. Let a broke single dad show you how it's done. It's Elena, she said. If we're married, you don't get to call me Ms. Cross in my own kitchen. Fine. Elena. Her name felt strange and warm in his mouth. Sit. She sat. She watched him cook with an intensity that unsettled him a little, like she was cataloging him the way she cataloged spreadsheets, and when he set a plate in front of her, she said, quietly, "I can't remember the last time someone made me dinner instead of the other way around." "Get used to it," Daniel said. Terms of the contract. It wasn't in the contract. They both knew it. Neither of them said so. Mia adjusted faster than either adult did. Children, Daniel had learned, forgave the world its complications far more easily than grown-ups did, as long as they felt safe, and Elena, for all her boardroom ice, seemed to melt entirely in Mia's presence within the first week. She sat on the floor of the yellow room in a silk blouse that cost more than Daniel's old monthly rent, building block towers with a 6-year-old, patient in a way that surprised him every time he watched it happen. "You're good with her," Daniel said one evening, after Mia had fallen asleep mid-sentence during a bedtime story, curled against Elena's side on the couch instead of his. Elena's fingers stilled in Mia's hair. "I had a little brother," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "He died when I was 14. Leukemia. I used to read to him every night in the hospital, because it was the only thing that made him stop being scared." She looked up, and there was something raw in her face that the cameras never captured, that the magazine covers never hinted at. "When I read Mia's file, the surgery, the odds, all of it, I didn't see a stranger's kid. I saw him. I couldn't let it happen again, not when I had the power to stop it. That's the real reason I chose you, Daniel. Not because you were convenient. Because I couldn't let another little kid's heart just stop, while I had the money to prevent it and spent it on things that didn't matter." Daniel sat with that for a long moment, watching this woman the world called ruthless carefully lift his sleeping daughter's hand off her lap so as not to wake her. "Elena Cross," he said softly, "you are nothing like what they say about you." "Don't tell anyone," she said, and for the first time, her smile reached all the way to her eyes. "I have a reputation to maintain." Mia's surgery happened 4 weeks into the marriage. Elena cleared her entire calendar without being asked, cancelled a merger meeting with a Japanese conglomerate that had taken 8 months to schedule, and sat in the surgical waiting room for 6 hours straight, holding Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles went white, not once checking her phone, not once looking like the CEO who ran board meetings with a stopwatch. When the surgeon finally came out and said the word successful and strong recovery expected, Daniel broke down completely, sobbing into his hands in a hospital waiting room for the first time since his wife's funeral, and Elena, cold, controlled, unshakable Elena Cross, wrapped her arms around him and held on like she needed the embrace as much as he did. "She's going to be okay," Elena whispered into his shoulder. "Daniel. She's going to be okay." "I know," he managed. "I know. Thank you. God, thank you." "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I didn't do this for gratitude." "I know that too," he said, pulling back to look at her, rain-soaked memory of the day they met suddenly transformed into something else entirely. "That's exactly why I'm thanking you." Something shifted between them in that hospital corridor, something neither of them named out loud, because naming it felt like a betrayal of the contract's careful boundaries. 1 year, then a clean, quiet end. But Daniel found himself reaching for her hand in the following weeks without thinking about it, and Elena found herself coming home earlier, skipping dinners with investors to eat pasta with a man who couldn't cook and a little girl who was finally, gloriously, breathing easy. Julian's investigators, of course, found nothing, because by month 3, there was nothing fake left to find. Daniel knew the sound of Elena's real laugh, the one that came out when she wasn't performing for a room, low and startled like she wasn't used to laughing, and it caught her off guard every time. He knew she took her coffee black except on the worst mornings, when she wanted 2 sugars and wouldn't admit it. He knew she still slept with a small stuffed rabbit hidden at the bottom of her closet, the one that had belonged to her brother, and that she thought no one knew about it until the day Daniel found it while looking for a spare blanket and simply put it gently on her pillow without a word, and she never mentioned it, and neither did he, but she started sleeping with it in plain sight after that. Elena, in turn, learned that Daniel hummed old boleros while cooking without realizing he was doing it, the same songs his mother used to sing, back before she passed and left him utterly alone in the world except for the daughter he'd built his entire life around. She learned that he still wore his late wife's wedding ring on a chain under his shirt, not out of lingering love, that had faded into a soft, grateful memory years ago, but out of duty to the mother of his child, a promise that Mia would always know where she came from. She learned that he cried, quietly, alone, on the anniversary of his wife's death, and that the first year he didn't have to hide it, because Elena found him in the yard at 2 a.m. and simply sat beside him in the cold without asking him to explain, and held his hand until the shaking stopped. "I didn't expect this," Daniel admitted one night, 5 months in, the two of them on the porch with 2 glasses of wine neither had touched. "Any of this. I thought I was signing up to survive a year. I didn't think that you'd actually like me," Elena said, one eyebrow arched, though her voice was gentler than the words. "That I'd fall in love with you," Daniel said, and the words hung in the cold air between them, more honest than he'd intended, too honest to take back. Elena went very still. "Daniel. I know the terms," he said quickly. "I know this ends in 7 months. I'm not asking you to change anything. I needed you to know. I'm not performing anymore, Elena. Somewhere in the last 5 months, this stopped being a contract for me." She didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched long enough that Daniel began composing an apology in his head, already bracing for the awkwardness of having said too much. Then Elena set down her wine glass, reached over, and laced her fingers through his. "I stopped performing around week 3, she said. "When you laughed at me for setting off the smoke alarm. I've been terrified to say it out loud, because I have never once in my life had something good that someone didn't eventually try to take from me. My father took my mother's company from her in the divorce. My grandfather made me choose between love and inheritance with this stupid marriage clause because he thought love made people weak. Julian is circling like a shark waiting for one crack to exploit. I didn't let myself believe I was allowed to actually want this, want you. Because everyone who's ever mattered to me has used my heart as leverage the second I showed it to them." "I don't want your money, Elena," Daniel said, holding her hand tighter. "I never did. I'd have signed that contract for free if it meant Mia lived. Everything since then, this, us, I want because it's you. Not the company. Not the house. You." "I know," she said, and her voice cracked on the words, the first genuine crack he'd ever heard in it. "I know that now. That's what terrifies me most." They didn't kiss that night, it felt too fragile a thing to rush, but they sat on that porch until the sun came up, hands locked together, and something unspoken but entirely mutual settled between them. This was no longer a countdown to an ending. This was the quiet, terrifying beginning of something neither of them had planned for and both of them now desperately wanted to keep. Of course, nothing that good stays uncomplicated for long, not in a world with a cousin like Julian in it. 6 weeks before the 1-year mark, Julian made his move. He couldn't find fraud in the marriage, there wasn't any left to find, so instead he manufactured a different kind of crisis. He leaked a story to the press, carefully doctored, built from a single out-of-context photograph of Daniel having coffee with a woman from Mia's school. Another parent, nothing more, a 5-minute conversation about a school fundraiser, twisted into a tabloid headline that screamed CEO's husband caught in secret rendezvous. By the time Elena saw it, it had already gone viral, already reached the board, already given Julian exactly the ammunition he needed to demand an emergency vote questioning whether the marriage was, in his words, a sham built to secure inheritance under false pretenses. The very clause that could strip Elena of the company entirely if the board believed it. Elena came home that night colder than Daniel had seen her since the first week of their marriage, and for one gutting moment, standing in the doorway of the kitchen with the tabloid printout in her hand, he thought she believed it. "Elena, that's not what it looks like. "I know," she said, too flatly, too fast. "I know it isn't. That's not what's wrong." She set the paper down on the counter, hands trembling slightly. "The board meets in 3 days. If I can't convince them this marriage is real, not just legally real, but real, in the way my grandfather's will actually meant, Julian takes everything. 11,000 employees. Everything my grandfather built. Everything I've spent my whole life proving I was capable of protecting." She looked up at him, and for the first time since the surgery waiting room, he saw real fear in her face. "And I realized, standing in that boardroom listening to Julian smile while he destroyed us, that I wasn't scared of losing the company, Daniel. I was scared of losing you. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That somewhere in the last 10 months, you stopped being the terms of a contract and became the thing I was most afraid to lose in the entire fight." Her voice broke. "I love you. I should have said it months ago. I was too much of a coward, too used to protecting myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability, and now Julian is going to use my own cowardice as a weapon against us and I don't know how to fix it in 3 days. Daniel crossed the kitchen and took her face in his hands, the way he hadn't quite dared to before, and said, "Then we don't fix it. We just tell the truth. You don't need to perform anything for that board, Elena. You just need to let them see what I see every single day. A woman who held my hand through a hospital corridor like her own heart depended on it, who reads bedtime stories to a little girl who isn't even biologically hers because she loves her that much, who cried on our porch admitting she was scared to be happy. Let them see that. It's not a performance. It never was, not for months now. It's just us. They'll dig into everything," Elena warned. "Every private moment. It'll be humiliating." "I don't care," Daniel said. "I love you too, Elena. I have for months. I was just waiting for the right moment to not sound insane saying it. Let Julian dig. He's not going to find a lie, because there isn't one left to find." The board meeting was held in a room with more glass and more money than Daniel had ever stood inside, Julian at the head of the table with a smug, rehearsed smile, laying out his case with cold precision, the timing, the desperation, the convenient rescue of a man on the edge of bankruptcy. Elena let him finish. Then she stood, and instead of pulling up spreadsheets or legal counterarguments, she did something Daniel had never once seen her do in public. She told the truth, unguarded, in front of every board member and every camera Julian had invited to embarrass her. She told them about the hospital corridor. About the smoke alarm and the pasta. About her brother, and the little girl whose heart she'd refused to let stop the same way his had. She told them Daniel had never once asked her for $1 beyond what the surgery required, that he tried, in the 2nd month, to sign a post-nuptial agreement forfeiting his claim to everything, because he said he never wanted anyone to doubt why he was there, and she'd refused to let him sign it, because by then she already knew she never wanted the year to end. "My grandfather's condition wasn't a trap, gentlemen," Elena said, looking directly at Julian. "It was a test of character. His way of making sure whoever ran this company after me had someone who could remind them what actually mattered when the numbers got large enough to make you forget. I failed to understand that for years. I thought love was a liability, something people used against you. Daniel Reyes taught me it's the opposite. It's the only thing in this building that isn't for sale, and it's the only thing Julian has never once been able to fake, which is exactly why he's trying so hard to convince you mine isn't real." The vote, when it came, wasn't close. Julian left the boardroom that day with nothing, his reputation among the board more damaged than Elena's ever was, and within a month he'd sold his remaining shares and left the company entirely, chasing some other inheritance to scheme after. That should have been the end of the story, contract fulfilled, company saved, love declared. But Daniel had one more thing he needed to do, and he did it on the 1-year anniversary of the day they'd married in that small, unconvincing courthouse ceremony. He didn't tell Elena where they were going that evening. He simply asked her to trust him, dressed Mia in her favorite yellow dress, and drove them back to the same courthouse steps where Julian had cornered him a year before with his suspicious smile. Elena stepped out of the car, confused, until she saw the small gathering waiting there, not press, not board members, just the two of them, Mia, and an officiant Daniel had quietly arranged weeks in advance. "Daniel, what is this?" "Our contract's up today," he said, taking both her hands in his, Mia clutching a small bouquet of yellow flowers beside them, beaming without understanding the full weight of the moment, only knowing that everyone she loved most was standing together in one place. "Legally, we could walk away clean right now. No consequences, no explanations owed to anyone. But I don't want a divorce, Elena. I never did. I want a real wedding. Not a rescue, not a rule my dead wife's memory or your grandfather's will require of us, just two people who found each other in the middle of the worst year of their lives and somehow built the best one instead. I love you. Not because of what you did for Mia, though I'll be grateful for that until the day I die. I love you because of who you are when nobody's watching, patient with a scared little girl, honest on a porch at 2 a.m. Brave enough to stand in a room full of powerful men and tell the truth instead of playing their game. Marry me again, Elena. For real this time. Not for 1 year. For all of them." Elena Cross, the woman the tabloids called Ice, the woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals without her pulse ever rising, the woman who had spent her whole life believing love was a weakness to be guarded against, stood on those courthouse steps with tears sliding freely down her face in front of witnesses for the first time in her adult life, and said, "Yes. God, yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." Mia, delighted, threw her small bouquet into the air like it was confetti, and everyone laughed, and Elena knelt down to catch her in a hug that had nothing to do with contracts or trust funds or company inheritances and everything to do with the family they'd built entirely by accident out of a desperate bargain made in the rain. They married again that afternoon, this time with nothing fake left to hide, not a headline, not a strategy, not a single guarded corner of either of their hearts. The photograph that ran in the papers the next day wasn't staged by any publicist. It was simply Daniel lifting Mia onto his shoulders while Elena laughed beside them, hair windblown, looking nothing at all like the untouchable CEO the world thought it knew, and everything like a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of protecting herself from exactly this, let herself be happy. Years later, when Mia was old enough to ask how her parents had really met, Daniel would tell her the truth. The rain, the black car, the impossible offer. And Elena would always finish the story the same way, every single time, her hand finding his without either of them thinking about it, the way it had every night since that first clumsy dinner of burnt pasta and unspoken hope. "Your father thought I was buying him a year," she'd say. "What I actually got was the rest of my life." And Daniel, every time, would smile and add the only part of the story that had ever really mattered. "Best contract I ever signed." Outside their window, rain would sometimes fall the way it had the night they met, but neither of them minded it anymore. It no longer felt like the beginning of a desperate bargain. It felt, simply, like home.